The town of Blackwood, Texas, did not appear on most state maps. If you were driving down State Highway 287, deeply entrenched in the pine-scented humidity of East Texas, you might notice a single, rusting green exit sign swallowed by kudzu vines. If you took that exit, the smooth asphalt quickly gave way to cracked, gray gravel, and the sky vanished behind an aggressive, suffocating canopy of loblolly pines and ancient cypress trees. The locals called the woods surrounding the town the Bramble. To the rest of Texas, the state was defined by dusty plains, desert canyons, and open skies. But Blackwood belonged to the deep, wet jungle of the Big Thicket. It was a place where the air felt like a damp wool blanket, where Spanish moss hung from branches like the tattered clothing of ghosts, and where the sun rarely managed to touch the forest floor. And in the summer of 1994, it was the place where things began to go terribly wrong. The missing and the marked. Thomas was a modern man, or at least, he liked to think so. As the newly appointed sheriff of Blackwood, he wore his crisp brown uniform with pride, carried a high-tech mag light flashlight, and believed in forensics, logic, and concrete evidence. He had moved from Austin to escape the big city stress, looking for a quiet place to raise his daughter, Maya. Instead, he found a town paralyzed by fear. He sat at his heavy oak desk, staring at 3 missing persons posters pinned to the corkboard. Billy Vance, age 14. Disappeared while hunting squirrels behind his house. Clara Higgins, age 42. Her car was found idling on the edge of the woods, the driver's door wide open. Deputy Marcus Brody, age 29. Thomas's own deputy, who had gone into the Bramble 48 hours ago to follow a lead. There were no tire tracks. No ransom notes. No blood. Just an abrupt end to their footprints at the tree line, where the dense brush began. The old-timers of Blackwood didn't offer much help. They spent their days sitting on the porch of the general store, rocking back and forth, spitting tobacco into the dust. When Thomas asked them about the disappearances, the store owner, an 80-year-old man named Ezra, simply shook his head. Thomas had laughed it off as superstitious country nonsense. But tonight, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town into a bruised purple twilight, the cicadas began to scream. It wasn't the usual rhythmic buzzing of a summer evening. It was a deafening, metallic shriek that vibrated in the fillings of Thomas's teeth. Then, the phone on his desk rang. The call from the canopy. Thomas snatched the receiver. "Sheriff Office, this is Thomas." For a long moment, there was only heavy, wet static. It sounded like someone blowing into a microphone from deep underwater. "Thomas." The voice was faint, raspy, and broken by static. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. It was Deputy Brody. "Marcus? Where the hell are you?" Thomas stood up, grabbing his gun belt. "We've been looking everywhere for you. What's your coordinates?" "So cold, Thomas." The voice whispered. The static flared. "The trees, they don't have roots, Thomas. They have fingers. I'm at the old mill. Please, it's looking right at me." The line went dead. Thomas didn't hesitate. The old mill was a collapsed, pre-Civil War timber mill located deep within the western tract of the Bramble. It had been abandoned for over a century. No one went there. He ran out to his patrol car, the heavy, humid Texas air hitting him like a wall. As he started the engine, he looked back at the town. The streetlights of Blackwood were flickering erratically. The screaming of the cicadas seemed to be rising in volume, originating from the dark wall of trees that ringed the valley. He threw the cruiser into drive and sped toward the maw of the forest. Chapter 3, Into the Wet Black. The gravel road ended abruptly, swallowed by a thick carpet of mud and rotting pine needles. Thomas cut the cruiser's engine, stepped out into the dark, and clicked on his heavy flashlight. The beam of light was instantly choked by a thick, swirling ground fog. The smell hit him next, it wasn't just the smell of wet earth and pine. It was the smell of copper, stagnant water, and old decay. A metallic, bloody scent that made his stomach violently wrench. "Marcus!" Thomas yelled, his voice sounding flat and muffled against the dense wall of vegetation. The forest didn't answer with an echo. Instead, the cicadas suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was terrifying. In East Texas, the woods are never silent. There should have been the croak of bullfrogs, the rustle of armadillos, the hoot of a screech owl. But there was nothing. The bramble had gone completely, holding its breath. Thomas pushed forward, his boots sinking into the black mud. He used his forearm to shield his face from the jagged briars and thorn bushes that reached out like clawed hands. The trees here grew unnaturally close together, giant sweetgums and weeping cypresses twisted around each other, their branches weaving a ceiling so tight that not a single speck of starlight could pierce through. As he walked deeper, the beam of his flashlight caught something strange. The bark of the trees wasn't normal. It was covered in deep, vertical grooves that looked horribly like human fingernail scratches. And from those grooves, a thick, dark fluid was weeping. Thomas reached out and touched it. It wasn't sticky like pine sap. It was thin, warm, and dark red. "It's bleeding," he thought, a cold spike of panic piercing his chest. "The damn forest is bleeding." Suddenly, a sound echoed through the darkness. Thump. 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 It was the heavy, rhythmic beat of something massive walking through the swamp. But it wasn't the sound of footsteps. It sounded like a massive wooden pillar being slammed into the mud. Thump. Thump. "Marcus?" Thomas called out, his hand flying to the holster at his hip. "I am armed. Identify yourself." The sound stopped. From the darkness ahead, just beyond the reach of his flashlight, a voice answered. "Thomas, help me." It was Brody's voice. But it sounded wrong. The pitch was perfectly identical to the phone call, but the cadence was mechanical, rhythmic, as if a tape recording was being played back through a broken speaker. "Marcus, stay where you are, I'm tracking your voice," Thomas shouted, breaking into a jog. Chapter 4, The Old Mill. He burst into a small, swampy clearing. In the center stood the ruins of the old mill. The wooden structure had long since rotted away, leaving only a crumbling stone chimney and a massive, rusted iron water wheel that sat in a black, stagnant pool of water. The Spanish moss hung so thickly over the clearing that it looked like a weeping willow cage. Thomas shined his flashlight toward the base of the chimney. "Marcus?" There was someone sitting there. A figure in a brown deputy uniform was slumped against the stone, its head hanging down against its chest. "Oh, Jesus," Thomas breathed, rushing forward. He dropped to his knees in the mud beside his deputy. "Marcus, man, look at me. What happened?" He reached out and grabbed Brody's shoulder to pull him up. The body was completely rigid. It felt like a solid block of oak. Thomas recoiled, swinging his flashlight up to illuminate Brody's face. A gasp of pure horror escaped his lips. The deputy's skin had turned a sickening, pale ash gray, hardening into a texture that looked exactly like tree bark. His eyes were gone, replaced by two hollow knots of wood from which the dark red sap slowly trickled. His mouth was locked open in a permanent, silent scream, and as Thomas looked closer, he saw that Brody's fingers had elongated, turning into thin, woody roots that had drilled deep into the mud beneath him. The forest hadn't killed him. It was transforming him. Thomas stumbled backward, tripping over a cypress knee and crashing into the foul water of the swamp. His flashlight rolled away, its beam pointing up into the canopy. From above, the voices began. "So cold, Thomas. Billy, come home for dinner." The voices dropped from the branches like falling leaves. There were dozens of them. He recognized the voice of Clara Higgins. He heard the voice of young Billy Vance. He heard voices with old Southern accents that must have belonged to people who disappeared a century ago. The forest was a library of the dead, mimicking the screams of its victims to lure in the living. Chapter 5: The Web of Roots. Thomas scrambled to his feet, dripping with black swamp water. He snatched his flashlight from the mud, but the beam was dying, flickering weakly against the oncoming darkness. The ground beneath him began to move. The massive, knotted roots of the cypress trees were shifting, slithering through the mud like a nest of awakened pit vipers. They wrapped around his ankles, their rough, thorned bark tearing through his leather boots. "Get off me!" Thomas screamed, pulling his service weapon and firing 3 deafening shots into the darkness. The muzzle flashes illuminated the horror of the bramble for a fraction of a second. In that split moment of light, Thomas saw that the trees surrounding the clearing weren't just trees. Their trunks bore the faint, grotesque silhouettes of human faces and torsos pressed against the bark from the inside, as if they were trapped in a layer of amber. Hundreds of them. The lost souls of Blackwood, spanning generations, absorbing into the horrific anatomy of the jungle. The roots tightened, pulling him down to his knees. The mud began to bubble, rising up to swallow his legs. He felt a sharp, piercing pain in his calves. The roots weren't just holding him, they were breaking through his skin, burrowing into his muscles, tapping into his veins like parasites seeking a water source. The heat of the Texas night vanished, replaced by an agonizing, numbing cold that crept up his legs. His skin began to itch, a terrible, dry sensation that spread rapidly across his thighs. He looked down in the dying light of his flashlight and saw his uniform pants tearing away as his flesh hardened, turning into gray, furrowed bark. "No! No!" he cried out, his voice cracking. The forest responded. The cicadas spun up again, their screeching chorus filling his head, drowning out his thoughts until he couldn't remember his own name. He couldn't remember Austin. He couldn't remember his badge. He could only think of one thing. Maya. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, Thomas managed to free his right arm from the encroaching vines. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his radio. It was a long shot, the signal inside the bramble was notoriously dead, but it was all he had left. He keyed the mic. "Maya, if you can hear me, don't look for me. Leave Blackwood. Run." The radio didn't transmit. It only emitted a low, wet click. Chapter 6: The Final Echo. The next morning, the sun rose over Blackwood, Texas, just as it always did. The air was hot, thick, and heavy with the promise of another grueling summer day. At the edge of the gravel road, Thomas's patrol cruiser sat with its doors closed, its battery dead, completely abandoned. In the town, the citizens went about their day with quiet, downcast eyes. They knew better than to ask questions when the sheriff didn't return. They knew the rules of the town. They knew the price of living on the borders of the bramble. Deep within the western tract of the woods, near the ruins of the old mill, a new tree stood proud and tall beside the stone chimney. Its wood was dark, its leaves a deep, unnatural crimson. Its roots were firmly planted into the rich, black Texas mud, drinking deeply from the ancient earth. The forest was silent. The hunger had been sated. But late that afternoon, a young hiker from out of town, ignoring the warnings of the locals, parked his truck near the highway exit and decided to take a stroll into the shade of the big pines. He walked past the kudzu vines, enjoying the break from the relentless Texas sun. As he walked deeper, the young man paused. He thought he heard something. He turned his head, straining his ears against the quiet of the woods. From a clearing just a few hundred yards ahead, a voice called out to him. It sounded like a man, authoritative, comforting, and kind. A voice that sounded exactly like a police officer offering assistance. "Hello?" the voice called out from the depths of the trees, its cadence slightly rhythmic, like a tape recording played on a loop. "Is someone there?" I am armed, identify yourself." The hiker smiled, feeling a sense of relief in the lonely woods, and stepped off the path, walking directly into the wet, dark embrace of the Texas jungle.